Hi, anytime you're trying to set and hold boundaries, there are complications and it's very difficult and it could be complicated by several things. But when you struggle with codependent traits, there are specific barriers that we tend to face every time we set a boundary or we try to maintain a boundary. And because of this, by the end of this cycle we go through with these barriers, we end up removing the boundary that we just worked so hard to set. So we kind of sabotage our boundaries over and over again. All of this comes from How to Stop Chasing Rejection. And on page 62, there's actually the cycle that's drawn out. You can take a look at that or find it in How to Stop Chasing Rejection. But I wanted to talk today about the barriers that we face every time we try to set and hold a boundary when we struggle with codependent traits, because this would be different than maybe what someone else experiences who doesn't necessarily have codependent traits when they're trying to set and hold boundaries. So the very first thing or the barrier that we face is that we don't set the boundary until we're fed up. So that's a big problem, because by the time we're fed up with whatever it is that's going on in our life, we're usually not thinking clearly. So now we're trying to set this boundary when we're really not having a clear understanding of what it is we want and what it is we want to see and what we're prepared to do about it if we don't. Instead, we kind of come in really hard. We kind of swing for the fences when we try to set that boundary, and it usually is not realistic. The boundary we try to set ends up being kind of unrealistic, which makes it hard to maintain. So the very first thing is, if we want to get out of this cycle that we face with the barriers with setting boundaries, instead of waiting until we're fed up, we want to learn to pay attention to what are the signs that we experience when a boundary's been crossed. So some things could be anger. If you find yourself getting upset, irritated, angry with the way you're being treated, chances are there's a boundary somewhere that's been crossed. It could also be panic or anxiety if you feel small. So what you want to do is pay attention to those early warning signs and try to address it back here instead of staying in it, and then we get fed up and then we try to set the boundary and then it's going to be unrealistic. So the next one would be, once we're fed up and we start to set that boundary, we tend to draw a really hard line in the sand. And this is, again, where it's really unrealistic. So it's a never and always, and you better not, and if I find, right? So you can kind of get into threats, more demands, right? When really boundaries are about us, what we're willing and not willing to accept, more so than demanding someone act a certain way. So if we're trying to control how someone else is acting or control how they're treating us, that's us having poor boundaries, and we're not going to be able to maintain it because it's not within our realm, right? It's not within our sphere of what we can control. So if you catch yourself drawing a really hard line in the sand, it's really good to ask for a break, to back up and to reassess, right? What is it that I really want or need? And what am I prepared to do to maintain this boundary? How am I going to maintain it on my side of the street? So if you catch yourself drawing a hard line in the sand, you probably reached the point of being fed up, and now you're trying to draw that hard line in the sand. So from there, we move into recruiting others. So once we get really fed up and we start kind of attacking someone else's character, we set that hard line in the sand. Now we start to recruit other people. So I may call a person who's not involved in this boundary issue, and I may tell them, every reason why I had to do what I had to do, right? So what I'm really saying is, see how bad they are, see how innocent I am, see why they left me no choice, see why I had to do what I had to do, right? So I'm trying to recruit them to my cause to kind of back me up because I'm probably feeling maybe a bit guilty about my behavior over the way I set the boundary, because now I've sort of made it more about me than about the boundary that they're crossing, because my behavior might have been really loud when I was fed up and then really loud and maybe awful while I was trying to draw that hard line in the sand. So now I'm trying to recruit in an effort to kind of reassure myself that I did the right thing, or to prove to myself that I did the right thing. Because remember, when we struggle with codependency, we're not really used to advocating for ourselves. We don't really have the skills to do that. So when we try to do it through setting boundaries, it can be natural to feel like we're doing something wrong when in fact we're not. The way we're doing it could be not appropriate or the best way to do it, but it's not wrong to set a boundary with someone. So we try to recruit other people. And the problem with that is the more we try to talk them into it, we find the more we're talking ourselves out of it. So that next part of that cycle with the phases of barriers that we face is that we begin to doubt ourselves. So now I'm having all this self-doubt creep in. Maybe I was too hard. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have just let it go. What if they, what if I make a mistake? Then they're not going to forgive me. So I start to kind of panic, and I really start to doubt myself, which leads to the next one, next part of the phase, which is backpedaling. So now I'm starting to backpedal. Now I'm starting to, worry about what it is that I've said, what it is that I've done. I really feel a lot of worry that this was all wrong, and how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to go back and fix this huge mess I did? So I'm not thinking anymore at all about the boundary they crossed. I'm now just solely fixated on my own behavior, and I'm feeling like it's the worst thing in the world, and now something bad's going to happen because I've just done this. So once we do that, and we backpedal, it's not uncommon for us to call the person we recruited, the one who we said, see why I had to do, see why they're bad and I'm not, right? When we call that person back, then we try to talk them out of everything we were just talking them into. So then we're going to say, you know what, actually it's me. You should have heard the way I talked to them. They're actually not really bad. It's me, and how could I have done this again? And actually I'm the bad one and they're the saint. And here's a list of every good thing they've ever done for me, and how ungrateful I've become, and I don't know what was wrong with me that day, and this is my fault. Because really, now if I talk them out of why I set that boundary, and then I get their support in removing the boundary, then I also get to keep this person in my life. But if I've just told them how bad this person really has been treating me, and now I reconcile with this person and I remove that boundary, then I'm worried I'm going to also lose this relationship. So now I'm feeling like it's going to be one or the other that I'm going to lose. This is all in my mind you, right? Now I'm worried that I'm going to lose one of the relationships. And so I'm trying to reconcile this one. And before I do that, I hurry and come back to the person I recruited, and I try to talk them out of everything I just tried to talk them into. So from there, after I do the backpedaling, I go to the person I initially set the boundary with, and I apologize to them. I tell them that I'm sorry and ultimately remove the boundary, right? So this would be like, I am so sorry the way I talked to you. You've been nothing but good to me. I don't know what came over me. Please forgive me. Can we just pretend like it never happened? I don't care if you don't come home at night. Or I don't care if you want to keep spending all the money on this. Or I don't care if you keep hanging out with this person who is terrible to me, right? Whatever the boundary was that we had, we tend to minimize the issue of the boundary, and we remove it on top of us being the one who apologized. So that's a huge problem. And you can see how if I go through this cycle, every time I start to set a boundary, I learn boundaries are the worst thing in the world. Boundaries are the most confusing, terrible thing that I could do. And so I'm even less likely to set a boundary, which means I'm really not setting my next boundary until I absolutely cannot take it anymore. And I'm only setting it when I'm super fed up. And then I go through this entire cycle again, and it just feeds itself. So if you struggle with setting boundaries, or if you know that you struggle with codependent traits, check out How to Stop Chasing Rejection. You can find it on Amazon.com. A full chapter is dedicated to the barriers that we face when we struggle with codependency to help you overcome that, because it can be different for you. So take good care, and I'll see you in the next one.